there. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Sales Dev Squad. It is your host, Mateo Elvira, here with a very special guest for you today. We'll be speaking with the inside sales manager over at Blume Global, Mr. Kyle Vamvouris. Very passionate about sales development, has been a sales development manager and in tech sales for quite some time now. Really passionate about inspiring and building quality SDR departments from the ground up. We'll be chatting a little bit more about what Kyle does to help his team as far as coaching and mindset goes. Thanks so much for hopping on the podcast today with us, Kyle.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
But yeah, Kyle, I always like to start every podcast here pretty similarly. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit more about kind of your journey into tech sales and I guess a little bit more about the role that you're at currently?
Absolutely. So I've had a very unconventional journey to tech sales. So I was originally selling gym memberships at Crunch Fitness, and I was also going to college at that time, and I was doing stand-up comedy, something that I absolutely love and I'm very passionate about. Having a lot of fun, mostly doing stand-up comedy, not focusing too much on the job or school, especially not school. So, I ended up actually dropping out of college to pursue stand-up more full-time or still part-time because I was working at Crunch. But I wanted to put all my attention to comedy. While I was working at Crunch, one of my bosses, the general manager of the club, ended up getting hired at a company called Intuit, more specifically Demand Force, a pretty well-known company in the Silicon Valley. San Francisco is a big startup. One of these unicorns got acquired by Intuit for I believe $500 million, something crazy. Anyway, he went there. My sales manager, Michelle, she went there. The fitness manager went there as well. So it was this big mass exodus, like all within the same few months.
Yeah.
So it didn't take long before I said, hey, can I go there too? And I didn't have a degree, but the referral was enough to let them look past that. Worked really hard on the interview. They ended up hiring me as an SDR, an entry-level position like everybody else in the SDR role, trying to become better at it. And then once you become really good at it, you're invaluable, not only to the company as someone who's good at generating pipeline, but also as a future salesperson because you can generate your own pipeline. So I moved up the ladder at Intuit, the SDR. We had multiple different levels, ended up getting promoted to an account executive where I was selling there for a little bit as well. Left Intuit to join a company called TalkDesk, where I was an account executive. I worked there for a bit, but ultimately had the drive to write a book on sales development called Cold Committed. So I decided to put down the headset and pick up the keyboard. I left TalkDesk, wrote and launched that book. And after that process was done, top 10 bestseller on Amazon in telemarketing. I think we were number 12 in sales and selling for that launch. It was a successful book launch. Then went to For Us All to run their sales development team. Started at 3, scaled that team up to 12, and it was incredibly successful. Led the team through our Series B round. Very impressive numbers there. And ultimately, after about 2 years, decided to leave there and join Blume to do a very similar thing. Small team, 3 people, looking to scale that up and rinse and repeat the success I had in For Us All. So that's the quick version of my background.
That's awesome. Really appreciate that insight there, Kyle. And, I'm really curious to learn a little bit more. Seems like you're obviously really good at sales development. You're really passionate about sales development, and also did some closing roles as well. But what kind of led to your transition going from like an individual contributor to now like obviously managing a group of SDRs and develop them, coaching them? Just kind of curious how you made that transition.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I don't think anyone goes through the transition from an individual contributor role with their eyes wide open. What I mean by that is really knowing what's in store from on the other side. When I was an individual contributor, I was very active in the SDR team that they had at TalkDesk. I try to help as much as I can. I really liked coaching the SDRs. They seemed very appreciative of it. So I kept doing it. I kept putting energy there and helping. I really enjoyed that part of it. And I always wanted to write the book to help. And it was an idea that a friend and I had a while back, and I kept putting it off. And, eventually he moved on to other things. So I decided to do it myself. But I went into it just wanting to coach, train. That was really the idea. The leadership side of it is something that comes later. And that is, it's not easy. That's for sure, especially when you're managing people who or at least for most of my career are older than me. So I really had to learn the leadership thing the hard way. And that was through, strong mentors, the people I surround myself with, and also I'm an avid reader. So reading a lot of books and trying to learn the leadership side. But the ultimate drive was to provide value and help people who are young in their careers become better, because I watched a ton of sales development reps get hired at, whether it be at Intuit or TalkDesk, and just get pushed out. And oftentimes I felt that the reason they were being pushed out was due to lack of resources and really the perspective of training than it was their lack of effort. So if I can help be a catalyst for SDRs, not only does a company benefit because we'll have a more effective team, but also those individuals will benefit, and they won't start thinking, oh, sales isn't for me, and push themselves out of something they'd be really good at. So it was really the driving force for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think being an SDR is really tough, and it's almost a necessity to have as many resources available so you could obviously, have the resources to fulfill the duties of your job. But like you mentioned, it's all about getting better and all about sharpening your axe. So really, really appreciate that and love that there. And I'm curious, Kyle, what are some ways or some resources that you typically provide your team in order to make sure they're the best on the floor every single day and just developing that skill set like you mentioned?
Well, I'm a huge fan of on the floor coaching during a cold call, whether you're sending emails, whatever the outreach is. I'm a big fan of on the floor coaching. I try to make myself very available to be grabbed. Come and grab me. Let's work it out. I'll listen to calls, give live feedback. That's really where I think a lot of learning happens is in the trenches. I don't want to sit behind a spreadsheet. I want to be there and listen and help. That's ultimately the role of a SDR manager, right? Is to help become a catalyst for your team so that they can produce more. So that is something that I think is incredibly valuable. But from an SDR's perspective, you've got to listen to your own calls. If calling's a big part of your job, you have to listen to your own calls and you have to dissect your calls. And a lot of people know that they should, but no one really does. Even with tools like Gong and these other tools that'll record your calls and send them to you, people do not listen to their calls on their own as much as they should be. They wait for call listenings in a group settings. Hopefully they have a manager that promotes that. You need to be listening to your own calls. You have to dissect yourself, and you have to understand where your weak spots are and where your bottlenecks are. Are you getting shut down at the very beginning of the call? Okay, we need to work on the intro, or we need to work on how to overcome brush-offs. Are you getting shut down at the end? Okay, well, we need to work on the close, right? So you need to find out where you have the most trouble. You have to be very self-aware, and you have to be willing to take that criticism so that way you can improve and can get better. Some people get it naturally, and they're just good from the second they get their grip, right? After 3 months, once they've ramped up, they can just do it any way they want and they'll be successful. That's not how it was when I was an SDR for me. It's not how it is for the majority of people. You have to work on it. You have to get better. And if somebody has the discipline to listen to all of their calls and dissect it, I think that it's close to guaranteed as success as you can be, because it's all about activity and it's all about self-discipline.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you bring up a great point in just how important coaching is, and it's almost a necessity in my opinion. But I'm actually reading a book right now, The Sales Manager Survival Guide by David Brock, and pretty much explains exactly what you mentioned, right? It's all about getting stuff done through your people, and how coaching is often overlooked, but it's probably the most important part of the job, and the most important way that a rep is going to develop the skills. And like you mentioned, going through that game tape and understanding exactly how your calls are going. And it wouldn't be possible without someone who's experienced, like a great manager like yourself, who, can help kind of guide the rep to understand like where they're falling through the cracks.
Yeah. Well, let me expand on that. I think coaching is incredibly valuable, but not just coaching about the job, on the job, how to get better at cold calling. I'm a firm believer that if your outside of work life is going well, your inside of work life will thrive. If your outside of work life is in shambles, your inside of work life is going to suffer. So I spend time with my reps on their outside of work life just as much as I do their inside of work life, because they need balance and they need to be able to work through challenges that come up through their everyday life, whether it's something simple like, someone broke my window. If you live in San Francisco, it's basically everybody gets their window smashed at some point in their car if they own one, or if it's stuff complex like family situations that come up. So I think it's really important to not only be an in-work pillar for them to lean on, but also help with their outside of work life as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome to hear. Like, what are some ways you kind of get to know your team outside of work and really like tailor that experience individually for all of your reps?
Well, just listening. I think a lot of it has to do with one-on-ones. You have to listen. You have to talk to your reps and figure out what makes them tick. If you're an individual SDR, you have to also be open to your manager. I'm fortunate that the team that I hire and that has always been on my team for the most part, or at least everybody who I've been able to work closely with for long periods of time, are really open with me, and I'm very open with them. And a lot of it comes from the top, and I would argue most of it, or if not all of it, comes from the top. I have to be just as transparent as my team is, and I have to speak their language, and I have to be fun, because the job's not that fun, right? But at the end of the day, we have results that we're held accountable to. So you have to strike this balance, and this is, strictly if you're in a management position, you have to strike the balance of keeping the job, I don't want to say fun, because we're really not going to keep the job fun, but adding some lightheartedness to the culture in order to keep people engaged in the position. And you do that through having fun on the floor, but also they see growth in the opportunity. When you're educating them on how to be better salespeople, people thrive for that kind of information, that professional growth, right? But also you have to uplift people outside of that, and you have to be vulnerable with them too. So you have to strike this really fine line between friend and boss, and you cannot be a friend, but you can't just be a boss either. You have to strike this fine line, because empathy is required in a management position for this kind of role, in most roles, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I guess kind of going on that, just like the self-development part, like how are you typically having like conversations with your reps, or really just understanding like where they want to go internally within the sales, or just internally at the company as a whole?
How, repeat the last part of that question.
Yeah, just kind of curious to hear a little bit more of like how you typically have conversations with your reps just regarding career pathing, whether that be within the sales organization or just the company as a whole.
Yeah, that's always a tough one, right? Because if it's a startup environment, there's not always openings, and so you have to manage through a lot of that. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to get somewhere, and a big part of the SDR manager's role is to figure out how to align a specific rep with what they want to be doing, whether that's in a sales capacity or in marketing or in customer success, whatever that might be. So I set clear expectations of when that conversation will begin. Hey, we're not going to start talking about your next steps until we're a year in. Then that's our reality. And then once we're there, it's going to be like, okay, where are we going? And let's spend the next 6 months trying to align yourself so that you can get that position. There's no guarantees. Some companies have very firm, like the world I come from, that at Intuit Demand Force, it was, hey, you do this by this time, you're promoted. It's very black or white. That's not how it works in the vast majority of companies. So you need to be creative, and you have to be an internal advocate for your team. And not only do you need to do that because it's the right thing to do to get promoted, but your team needs to see you as that kind of person. I will always fight for my team. My team comes before me. And if I have to fight to get somebody the position that they want, I'll put everything on the line to do that if I think they deserve it. If not, I'll tell them. They'll know they don't deserve it because I'll tell them they don't deserve it. But if I think somebody deserves a specific position, I will go to bat for them in a more aggressive way than the vast majority of people would. And that's the value I add to the team, to my specific team. And I believe that's the value I add to the company. I also need to be somebody who can look outside of my team and say, hey, what's best for the company? And if it's not best for the company at that point, then I need to talk to the rep and say, look, I realize we're 18 months into this. It's not coming, and you have to manage that in a different way. So it's really complex, and every person is different. How you manage every person is different. I find honesty is the best lever to pull. So I try to be really, really honest and transparent and make sure that I'm setting the right expectation. And that has served me well. So people are always going to make their decisions, but if they're growing, they're learning, then I think they still stick around longer than they would at a place where they don't feel that way and there's no way to move up, but it is always a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Really appreciate that, Kyle. I think that's phenomenal advice there. And I think this is a perfect segue, kind of shifting into our next topic here regarding mindset. Obviously, I feel like you have a really good mindset when it comes to sales management, right? Always putting your team first and looking out for their best interest, as obviously their best interest is your best interest. So I wanted to pick your brain, how important is having a good mindset in an SDR role, even an SDR manager role? And what are some ways that you can align your mindset when maybe sometimes it's veering off in different directions, so to speak?
It is the most important thing, in my opinion. I am often shocked by the mindset of people who I've interviewed, people who are in various roles at companies I've worked for. A lot of pessimism. I think it's all hurting you. I have a pretty aggressive opinion on mindset, and I really look for people who are more optimistic. I try to find very diverse backgrounds. It's from a hiring perspective, but as an SDR, if you're an SDR, you have to have a very aggressive mindset. Doesn't mean you have to be aggressive on the phone. Doesn't mean your personality has to be aggressive, but you have to really want to get through the SDR position into your next role. And you have to align the SDR position with your future. It has to be aligned. If the SDR role is not a strategic career choice by you in order to launch you to the next part of your career, then you're not going to get through it. It just doesn't happen. There has to be a lot of urgency around the SDR role because it's tough. It's a grind. There's a ton of rejection. No one gets rejected as much as SDRs get rejected. It's chaos. If you listen to a cold call floor for a day, you're going to be the saddest person ever because it's a lot of hang-ups, harsh words, right? So you have to be very, very strong mentally to handle that. And this whole, it's almost a joke. And maybe I'm getting a little controversial, but it's almost a joke, the whole work-life balance nonsense. If I hear an SDR tell me about work-life balance, I'm sorry, we're not at that point in our career yet. Like, what are you, 23? What are we talking about? Work-life balance. You don't even have a gray hair yet. So I have a pretty aggressive view on that kind of stuff because I just think it's ridiculous. You know, oh, well, I'll get burnt out. Well, you need to learn how to work through burnout because you're going to encounter times in your career where you're going to be burnt out, but you have no choice but to perform. Mm-hmm. That is going to happen to anybody who wants to be incredibly successful. Now, if that's not the goal, then disregard what I'm saying. But I would imagine a lot of people's goal is to become incredibly successful. And you will be in a position where you're forced to perform and you feel burnt out. And if you have never felt that, even at a micro level, which exists in this SDR world, if you've never felt that before, that's going to be unusual and you're not going to perform. So in my view, the SDR is like a little incubator, and you get to experience different challenges that you will overcome in your career, but on a very small scale. So let me give you an example.
Please.
When I was at Intuit, I was close to my date to get promoted, and it wasn't looking like it was going to happen. And I was very nervous. I was behind on my number for the quarter, and I had to hit that number in order to make promotion. And I had a panic attack, which I never have. It was my first one, my only one. I had no idea what it was even going on to my body. I was started hyperventilating at my desk. I'm like, Jesus, what's going on? I thought I was dying or something. I get up, I run to the stairwell, and I can't breathe. So I'm like, I'm hyperventilating. I'm trying to catch my breath. I feel like I got the wind knocked out of me. And then I'm shaking, and I'm like, what is going on? I start crying, like I don't get it. And my mind's just racing. It's free, and I'm freaking out. And I'm really like, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. I have 1 week. I have to get, X amount. This isn't going to happen. And I just start panicking, pure panic. And I never experienced something like that before. And now, I won't leave you hanging, but this isn't the point of my story. I end up getting myself together, and I end up getting what I needed to get promoted. But the real message here that I'm trying to get across is that moment where I was panicking and freaking out, I had 2 options. And I said this to myself at the time. I was aware of this at the time. You always have 2 options when you're at a point where it seems like what you need to do to achieve success is unattainable. Your 2 options are: option A, give 100%, don't stop, get as aggressive as possible, spend every single available second doing whatever you can to move the needle, and risk failure. And you probably will fail, but at least you gave it everything you got. Mm-hmm. Option B is to give 50%, guarantee your failure. It's guaranteed. Option A, you might feel unlikely, but you might still claw out of it. Option B, give 50% effort, guaranteed failure. And when you fail, at least you can tell yourself you didn't really try.
Yeah.
It protects the ego, right? And that's the killer. That's everyone's killer, is ego. You have to manage ego. And the problem is ego is really powerful, right? So you want ego to supercharge your growth, but you also need to dial it back to stop yourself from self-sabotage. It's a fine balance. That's what you do if you choose that second option. You get 50% fail. Oh, at least I didn't try. Oh man, they didn't give me enough leads. Okay, then how come you didn't spend every second outside of calling hours trying to find any lead you could? Right? Like there's always an aggressive response to the excuse. I don't care about the excuse. Let's give the 100%. Let's leave it all out on the court, and we'll see what happens. And sometimes magic happens. Sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you have to look failure in the eye and take away from it what you can. But I think it's incredibly important that you choose which side you are in the decision. Are you option A or are you option B? And anytime you are presented with the options, it's not even a question. I'm an option A, and I'm going to take option A every freaking time because I have enough confidence in myself, my own abilities to actually perform. And that's going to happen as an SDR. That's going to happen as a manager. That's going to happen as a VP. That's going to happen at a C level. You are always going to encounter that. The question is, which one are you going to pick? I recommend the first option, but that's not the one that is the most popular.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I think that comes full circle back to what you were saying just about mindset, right? The mindset of person A or option A is completely different than the mindset of option B or person B.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also action. If you're to choose option A, you have to act on the choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard, man. Like anyone, and I'm sure you've experienced this scenario before, but anyone who's encountered a situation where you're like, gosh, I'm probably not going to this isn't going to go well. Have you ever been in that situation where you're like, yikes, this is not going to go well? And you're just kind of forced to do it. Oh, it's brutal. You're like, oh my God, like this is not, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough energy. If you've ever had a deadline and been like, whoa, how am I going to finish this essay in an hour? It's impossible. If you've ever had that experience, you get a really micro version of how do I respond to pressure? Do I push back and do I fight, or do I let it overwhelm me?
Mm-hmm.
That's the key, right? That's really the core of what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming that's really the type of mindset and traits that you look in when you're hiring new reps. Like in addition to like mindset and kind of that grit as well, Kyle, like what do you think are some other important characteristics that's almost a necessity for someone to just be a quality sales development rep?
So I look for two main things. So one of them is the first one, which we just talked about, that grit. That's really important. Being an optimist, and I say being an optimist, I don't mind pessimism at all. I don't mind the realistic thinking. I think it's incredibly valuable, but I think you also need to generally be a positive person in order to get through the role. And I've been disproven on that a few times, but I think as a general rule, that is a better recipe than the pessimistic route. But I have seen some people who are more on the pessimistic side be successful. So the first thing, that grit, that mindset stuff. But the second one is a little bit different, and I call it a character. I really like different people. I don't want to hire the same type of person at all. I don't think it's good to have a bunch of people who are very, very similar. I think it makes a culture very sterile. Everyone's the same. I like very diverse teams. So I like characters is what I say. I want people with strange background, who has weird hobbies. I hired one guy who used to race snow, those machines you ride in the snow, what are they called?
Yeah.
Snowmobiles, duh.
Yeah.
Mobile. He used to race snowmobiles in Alaska. He was born and raised in Alaska. Dropped everything to move to San Francisco because he wanted to get into tech sales. That's awesome. That's a great type of person. I've also hired the guy right out of college too. Those are two different people. One's a lot older and has been through a lot and does all this crazy outdoor stuff. The other one's fresh out of college, motivated, different background. I like the contrast. I've hired people who are close to pro level baseball. They're throwing baseballs of 98 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour. I've also met people whose background is strictly in marketing, and they've done, like more marketing work and everything that makes up a person that would make them different from the people that exist on my team today. I'm very interested in, and I love people with stories. I love people who get excited about stuff. I like people with hobbies. I like people who are interesting. So that's really what I look for, those two things. Everything else I can train. You don't know how to cold call, fine. I can teach you how to do that. It's not crazy. If you give me your attention, I'll give you my wisdom. If you know, even if their mindset's not perfect, that's fine. If they have a good heart, they're hardworking, and they have substance to their personality, that's good. But if I ask you what you like to do in your free time and you tell me you like to go to hang out with friends, it's like, okay, doing what? You know, I like people who have like weird stuff that they like. One guy, you know, he loves fishing, and he's like, oh, I go fishing all the time. And he's more passionate about fishing than I've ever met before. Like, he was like an 80-year-old guy who's been fishing his whole life. The guy's in his 20s. And he's so passionate about fishing. I went fishing with him, and he knows everything. You know, we're catching stingrays in the bay. I didn't even know stingrays existed in the bay.
Wow. I didn't either.
It's madness. Yeah, it's crazy. Next thing you know, it's 11 p.m. We're fishing in Oakland, catching stingrays and sharks. Like, this is crazy. I didn't know this existed. Right? Like, I really like people that are unique and they bring something to the table outside of the norm.
Yeah, and I love how you actually like can say like you caught stingrays with one of your SDRs out there, because you really just, I'm assuming you want to connect with your SDRs and be there for them as well. That's a great story.
Yeah, maybe, but I also want to catch stingrays. You know, I like sharing the experience, but it's something that makes them so passionate.
Yeah.
That I want to, and I'm going to, one of my old SDRs is getting married. Yeah, he hasn't worked for me in a year. He invited me to the wedding. I'm flying to Alaska tomorrow.
No way.
To go to his wedding. He loves Alaska. I'm doing all this crazy Alaska stuff. This is the guy who was, you know, riding these snowmobiles. I'm going to do all this crazy Alaska stuff. I like people who are into stuff. And also, I mean, if you talk to my wife, she wants to strangle me all the time. I get really into things. I like hobbies a lot, and I like to go deep and acquire a lot of weird knowledge about stuff that I think is interesting. So anybody who's very passionate about something, I'm on board, and I'll try anything. So anyway, I like those type of people. I try to stay around that. It keeps me, I don't know, keeps me interesting, I think.
Absolutely. Really, really appreciate that, Kyle. I know we're coming up to the end here, but I always like to end off the podcast with this question here. For anyone out there listening that is maybe living in Alaska and potentially considering a role selling Ray software to the Bay, but they're not sure if, you know, tech sales would be a good career for them, or maybe they kind of have this misconception in their mind. What advice do you have for them?
To figure out what you want to do. And does the SDR role align with what you want to do? If you're unhappy with where you are now, you need to figure out what would make you happier with where you are. And a lot of times, and I don't think a lot of people like to say this, but a lot of times it's money. Like, I don't like being broke. Okay, well, what can you do to make money? And if you didn't go to school for marketing, or you didn't, you know, you don't have a particularly valuable skill today that makes you incredibly valuable, then you need to figure it out. So if money is what you need, tech sales is a great option for that. If you want to be good at selling, if you like the lifestyle of sales, if you like the culture of sales, you have a very social culture, then selling is where you belong. But my question to that person would be, why wouldn't you do it? I think it's the greatest career on the planet. You get paid like a doctor and you don't need a degree. You know how long people go to school to become a doctor? It's madness.
Yeah.
And the top salespeople make way more than a doctor. And they didn't even have to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them do. That's amazing that there's a career that you don't need to go be a doctor for.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's paid comparable to a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
That's unbelievable. I'm shocked that not everybody is trying to be. And I get it takes a type of personality. Sure, that might be true. But I think a lot more people have it in them than believe they do. I think some of that's misconception. I think some of that is self-confidence, but it is one of the greatest careers, if not the greatest career on the planet. Maybe being a late night TV show host is pretty fun. But outside of that, outside of the extremes, it's the greatest career on the planet. It's fun. You get to talk to a lot of interesting people. You get paid very well. You're crazy not to do it, but you have to start somewhere, and you have to be very dedicated, and you have to surround yourself by people who want to be better too and who push you to be better. If you're not surrounded by those kind of people, you're not going to get anywhere. So find those people, find the leadership or the role, the company that's willing to invest in you and go all in. And I think anyone will be successful. Action. You take action, you work hard, I think you'll see results.
Well said, Kyle. Couldn't agree with you more. I think this is a phenomenal career and definitely don't see myself doing anything else. So really appreciate that, Kyle. And additionally, if anyone out there listening would like to contact you directly or maybe get a copy of your book or potentially interested in career opportunities at Blume Global, where can they find you?
I would just look me up on LinkedIn, Kyle Vamvouris. My name will be in the title, I'm sure. And connect with me. I always connect with people, and I'm happy to help when I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a phenomenal guest, Kyle. I know the Sales Dev Squad community will definitely be really appreciative of your great wisdom. Thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in to another episode of the Sales Dev Squad. We'll catch you on the next one.